Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. In a few months from now, China is set to hold the Winter Olympics. Beijing will host 3,000 athletes, sponsors and broadcasters. There are calls to boycott these games. The reasons are many, from exporting the pandemic to persecuting its own people and disrupting peace in the region. China's crimes are multiple and serious. So will the world walk the talk on making China pay? Superpower America is talking about a diplomatic boycott. It's a cop-out. If the world is serious about holding China to account, it will have to go beyond these half measures. Because for China, Olympics are a very big deal. China's Olympic dream is an old and difficult one. They wanted to host the Olympics in the year 2000. They lost the bid, thanks to their poor human rights record. After a long pursuit, they got a chance. The year was 2008, China's first Olympics. The man in charge of that event was a certain Xi Jinping. 13 years later, the same man is in charge of China, and the country's human rights record is only worse. On Gravitas tonight, we discuss why participating in these games, now being called the Genocide Games, will be like rewarding China for all its crimes. Also on the show, Kulbhushan Jadhav, the Indian businessman unlawfully held in Pakistan, will finally get the right to appeal. A joint session of the Pakistani parliament passes a bill. We'll tell you what it means. America's climate hypocrisy exposed again. Just days after Joe Biden promised to lead by example at the COP26 summit, his government is auctioning a record 80 million acres for oil and gas drilling. The Maldives government slams the India Out campaign, saying it's an attempt to sour their relationship with New Delhi and does not reflect the popular sentiment. And the world's most expensive painting has been downgraded. Salvatore Mundi was sold for a record $450 million to a Saudi prince. We'll tell you why the downgrade. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Poland's defense minister has warned that the crisis on the Belarusian border could last for months or even years, a day after Polish forces fired tear gas to deter rock-throwing migrants seeking to enter the EU. Armenia and Azerbaijan have announced a Russia-brokered ceasefire which is being respected, ending hostilities that erupted earlier in the day along their border. The clashes left 8 dead and sparked fears of another flare-up in tensions. The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for a twin suicide bombing on Tuesday in the Ugandan capital Kampala that killed 3 people and left several wounded. The United States has imposed an entry ban on Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega and his government over recent controversial elections that saw Ortega win a 4th straight presidential term. British police have said the Liverpool blast suspect was planning the attack for at least 7 to 8 months. Iraq-born Ahmad Swialmin rented a property in April and made purchases for his bomb at that time. US pharmaceutical giant Pfizer has said its prospective antiviral COVID-19 pill will be made available more cheaply in the world's least wealthy countries, subject to the oral antiviral medication passing ongoing trials and regulatory approval. An 86-year-old great-grandmother is crowned Miss Holocaust Survivor in an annual Israeli beauty pageant to honor women who survived the horrors of the Nazi genocide. The Cumbre Vieja volcano on Spain's La Palma island has continued to erupt for over 2 months now. Local news outlets have reported that a 72-year-old man has died, the first victim of the eruption. After missing out on qualification for the last edition, Netherlands have booked their ticket to the 2022 FIFA World Cup. The Dutch scored 2 late goals to beat Norway 2-0 to finish top of the European qualifying Group G, ahead of Turkey. In South America, Argentina also sealed their qualification after a goalless draw against Brazil in San Juan. Garbiñe Muguruza has become the first Spanish player to advance to the singles championship match at the WTA Tour Finals since 1993. The former world number 1 brushed aside compatriot Paula Badosa 6-3, 6-3. She will now take on Estonian world number 8 Anett Kontaveit, who overcame Greece's Maria Sakkari 6-1, 3-6, 6-3 in the other semi-final.
What I'm about to show you is unprecedented. This happened a couple of weeks back. The torch for the 2022 Winter Olympics was being lit. Suddenly, someone shouted, "How can Beijing be allowed to host the Olympics?" Watch this.
How can Beijing be allowed to host the Olympics, given that they are committing a genocide against the Uyghurs?
It's a valid question to ask. How can Beijing be allowed to host the Olympics? The world knows this. China is committing a genocide in Tibet and Xinjiang. How can it be allowed to host the Winter Olympics? Do you know what happened to those who asked this question? They were pushed to the floor by security and detained. They were taken to a police station. No charges were filed, but the message was quite clear. Protest is not an option. China will not allow anyone to oppose these games. When are they happening? Next year. The opening ceremony is on the 4th of February 2022. These are the Winter Olympics. They're being called the Genocide Games. Among the most controversial Olympics in history, this event is facing a massive backlash, but Beijing is being protected by complicit stakeholders and reluctant politicians the world over. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you how. We begin with the protests. They're growing by the day. You already saw what happened in Greece. They were denied a voice by the International Olympic Committee. But these protesters are not alone. They have the backing of human rights groups, advocacy groups, and celebrities. So far, more than 180 human rights organizations have called for a boycott of these games. They have a simple demand from world leaders: boycott the Olympics. Do not send your representatives and do not send players to compete. Is this an unprecedented request? It isn't. There is historical precedent. At least 6 Olympics have been boycotted in the past: the 1956 Melbourne Games, the 1964 Tokyo Games, the 1976 Games in Montreal, the Moscow Games in 1980, the Los Angeles Games in 1984, and the 1988 Games in Seoul. Wars, invasions, and apartheid were the reasons behind these boycotts. This time it's human rights. So what will world leaders do? Will they boycott the Genocide Games? Well, they're hesitant. They don't want a complete boycott, but they still want to be seen as doing something. So they have found a middle ground. They will send their teams, but none of the politicians will attend. They're calling it a diplomatic boycott. That's what America is considering, we're told. The White House is expected to make an announcement soon. US President Joe Biden is going to skip the event, as well as US government officials, all of them. America's friends in Europe have similar ideas. Back in July, the European Union decided to not send any diplomats. The UK too has declared a similar boycott plan. It was passed by the British Parliament. But the motion is non-binding, so it's a meaningless boycott, a half-hearted measure. Let me show you what a real protest looks like. This is Ines Kanter. a basketball star in the United States, he wants a boycott of the Winter Olympics. And he knows how to make a statement. Cantor has been hitting out at China through his shoes. Free China, stop organ harvesting in China, stand with Taiwan, free Hong Kong, and finally no Beijing 2022. Cantor wore these shoes during NBA games. And by the way, basketball has a huge following in China. What do you think Beijing did when it saw these shoes? They censored Enes Kanter. And China did not stop there. Cantor's team, the Boston Celtics, were censored too. Their games were taken off television and the internet in China, and any video clips from the team were scrubbed off by censors. Despite the backlash, Cantor has been relentless in his protest.
There is a genocide happening right now. Right now, as I speak this message. Torture, rape, forced abortions, and sterilizations. Family separations, arbitrary detentions, concentration camps, political re-education, forced labor. Heartless dictator of China, Xi Jinping, and the Communist Party of China, I'm calling you out right now in front of the whole world. Close down the slave labor camps and free the Uyghur people. Stop the genocide now.
Cantor called Xi Jinping a heartless dictator. And China is very touchy about things like these. It is paranoid about protests. It doesn't want the games to be tarnished by protests, so it has started blocking people. Fans from overseas will not be allowed to attend the events. No foreigners, no protests. Critics at home can be managed. What about the other stakeholders? The International Olympic Committee, or the IOC, and the sponsors, what about them? They're proving to be a cakewalk. Let me tell you how. The IOC says that it wants to remain neutral, free from any politics, which is not fine. But if the IOC insists on this, being apolitical, how does it explain its previous lofty statements? Almost a year back, the International Olympic Committee came up with a human rights strategy. It said it would align the Olympics with the guiding principles of the United Nations. Great idea. Only it hasn't been implemented. When will they do it? After the Beijing Games, they say. How convenient is that? So it's a complete cop-out by the IOC. What about the sponsors? They choose to remain silent about China's human rights violations. 13 brands are top sponsors for these games. They include names like Coca-Cola, Airbnb, Procter & Gamble, Intel and Visa. A human rights group wrote to all of them. They were asked one question. Will they use their influence to corner China on human rights? Do you know how many sponsors replied? Just one. German financial services firm Allianz. And even they were non-committal. Why are these companies silent? Because there's big money involved. They make billions from the Chinese market. They don't want to ruin their balance sheets for human rights. Here is an estimate. 10 out of 12 overseas sponsors earn at least $110 billion from China. They won't speak out on human rights because they stand to lose billions in revenues. The world has known about China's genocide for years, but global institutions have failed to hold China to account. The Olympics are no different. The international system is not just protecting China, it is rewarding it. It's a system made up of weak global leadership, weaker sporting institutions, and companies that put profit above lives. Olympics have a track record of being on the wrong side of history. The best example of that is the Berlin Olympics of 1936. That's when Hitler hosted the Olympics. And even then there were demands for a boycott. There was a heated debate around it. Some countries threatened to pull out, but they failed to follow through. The world today refers to those games as the Nazi Games. And now history will repeat itself with the Genocide Games of 2022. Beijing is going to try to get rid of that label, of course. But these Winter Olympics will remain tainted, just like the Communist Party, which is fighting serious charges of sexual assault as we speak and making it worse by silencing the victim. It's been almost 2 weeks. The world hasn't heard from Peng Shuai, the Chinese tennis superstar and a former world #1. We at WION have been tracking her story since day one. And the allegations, we can tell you, are very serious. Peng Shuai made a major claim before she went missing in China. She accused a former vice premier of sexual assault. She accused Zhang Gaoli of coercing her to have sex. About 3 years back, Zhang Gaoli invited Peng to his home and he then sexually assaulted her in his house. Peng made the revelation on Weibo, a Chinese social media platform. And since then, she's been missing. The world hasn't heard from her. China removed Peng's post. It has been censoring any discussion about her allegations, but Beijing cannot stop international tennis stars from asking questions. This week, Novak Djokovic spoke out. He's the current world #1 in men's tennis, the most dominant player in the men's game. Djokovic says the allegations are shocking. Listen to this.
I don't have much information about it. I did hear about it a week ago, and it's shocking, you know, that she's missing. I mean, more so that it's someone that I've seen on the tour in the previous years quite a few times. So I mean, there's not much more to say than hope that she'll be found, that you know, that she's okay, and it's terrible that. You know, I can imagine just how her family feels, you know, that she's missing.
Peng's disappearance has shocked the tennis world. Naomi Osaka has also spoken out. She too is a world tennis champion, and she posted this today. Let me read it out for you. This is what she says. I was recently informed of a fellow tennis player that has gone missing shortly after revealing that she's been sexually abused. Censorship is not okay at any cost. I hope Peng Shuai and her family are safe and okay. I'm in shock of the current situation and I'm sending love and light her way. Osaka sent out this message with the hashtag, "Where is Peng Shuai?" This hashtag has now become a global campaign, and unlike the IOC, top executives in global tennis are speaking out. They're speaking about this. They're demanding Peng Shuai's safety. Allow me to read out another statement for you. It's from Stacey Alistair, the former CEO of the Women's Tennis Association. Alistair now serves as the head of the US Tennis Association. Here is the statement. Our sport is focusing on the health and safety of Peng Shuai. Business is secondary. It is tough, and it is also tough for this very courageous young woman that has broken her silence and come forward with these allegations. How all of this unfolds is very difficult to say at this point, but decisions will have to be made. Messages of support and demands for strong action. What do they tell you? China wants to brush these allegations under the carpet, but that's no longer acceptable to the tennis world. They want protection for Peng Shuai. They want her safety. And for Beijing to take action against Zhang Gaoli, the former vice premier. So far, China is behaving as if it doesn't know anything. But the pressure is growing, and the question is staring China in the face. Where is Peng Shuai? We'll keep tracking this one. To the United States now. And you might remember the promises that Joe Biden made at COP26. He promised to take, quote unquote, transformative action on the climate crisis. He vowed to lead the world by example. It's been just a week, and Biden has already broken these promises. His administration is selling oil and gas fields in the Gulf of Mexico, leasing them out to energy companies for drilling. The areas for sale are spread across 80 million acres. The reserves are worth 1.1 billion barrels of crude. The extraction process is expected to release 600 million tons of planet-heating gases. What should we call America now? Our next report spells it out for you.
It is official. The United States of America is a climate hypocrite. Just a few days ago, it promised to lead by example. And now it's setting an example of what not to do.
Let this be the start of a decade of transformative action that preserves our planet and raises the quality of life for people everywhere.
After making tall promises to protect the climate at COP26, the Biden administration is selling oil and gas fields. An auction that is at odds with Biden's own climate agenda. It will take place in the Gulf of Mexico. Oil reserves with 1.1 billion barrels of crude will be leased out to energy companies for drilling. The areas up for sale are spread across 80 million acres in sea. That is about twice the size of Florida. This will make it the largest ever sale of drilling leases in the region. A record sell-off that will see decades of planet-heating emissions. It is a jarring contradiction. The enormous size of the lease sale goes against Biden's own climate agenda. What is worse is the fact that it comes right after the COP26 summit, a summit where Joe Biden promised to lead by example.
We'll demonstrate to the world the United States is not only back at the table, but hopefully leading by the power of our example.
America is betraying the world in climate action. Environmentalists are stunned. They say it is hard to imagine a more hypocritical thing to do. You see, the drilling leases are expected to release 600 million tons of planet-heating gases. That's more than the total annual emissions of the UK, Pakistan, Italy, France, Egypt and Israel. It is an alarming development. Activists are calling the sale a climate bomb. They say it is an incredibly reckless step, one that will take America's climate goal back by several years. Some have also pointed to the pace of drilling permits in Biden's tenure. On an average, the Biden administration has handed out 339 drilling permits a month since inauguration. That is more than the previous Trump administration, which handed out 316 permits every month. What is their excuse? The law, says the White House. In June, at least 13 American states filed a lawsuit to block Biden's suspension of new drilling permits. A federal court in Louisiana upheld the lawsuit and revoked Biden's decision to halt the permits. The White House is blaming this courtroom setback for the latest sale. It says it is only complying with the court ruling. But legal experts say the court's decision alone doesn't prevent the administration from stopping the deal. They say America's Department of Interior still has the final say. Then why does it not exercise this right? Perhaps because billions of dollars are at stake. This deal has punctured America's already shaky credibility on the climate crisis. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Now the big story from Pakistan, Kulbhushan Jadhav has got the right to appeal. It's a very big development in his case and a hard-fought win for India. Kulbhushan Jadhav, as many of you would know, is an Indian national unlawfully held in Pakistan. He's been languishing in a Pakistani jail for more than 4 years now. All this while, he was denied consular access, meaning he could not access support from Indian diplomats in Pakistan. And this is in violation of the Vienna Convention. The convention says that all countries must allow consular access to citizens of other nations. Pakistan violated it for years. It charged Kulbhushan Jadhav with espionage and terrorism. A Pakistani military court handed him the death sentence. This was in April 2017. India went to the International Court of Justice against this, challenging the death sentence, also demanding consular access for Kulbhushan Jadhav. In July 2019, the International Court of Justice passed a verdict. It told Pakistan to give consular access to Jadhav and also to ensure that he can appeal the conviction. It has taken Pakistan more than 2 years to follow this order. Today, a joint session of Parliament in Pakistan was held. One of the bills passed is related to Jadhav's case. It grants Jadhav the right to appeal, meaning he can now challenge his death sentence in a Pakistani court. Islamabad is trying to paint this gesture as a gesture of goodwill. We can tell you it isn't. Pakistan has done this under duress, and that too 2 years too late. It took a joint session to deliver this. Although the session was not convened for this case, it was called to help Imran Khan negotiate some dire straits. The Prime Minister of Pakistan is under pressure from all sides, from the opposition, which is demanding snap polls, from extremist groups, which are demanding legitimacy, and from the army that doesn't like interference. With this session, Imran Khan hopes to kill 3 birds with 1 stone. Show his opponents who calls the shots in the country. How is he going to do this? By getting some crucial bills passed to show that he is in control. More than 24 bills are on the agenda. Imran Khan is in a rush to get them passed. But the Pakistani opposition is giving him a tough time because these bills, some of them at least, are controversial. Most of them are primarily electoral reforms aimed at changing how elections are conducted in Pakistan. Two of these bills stand out. One is about authorizing electronic voting machines in elections, EVMs. Pakistan still does not use them. The PTI, Imran Khan's party, wants to put them in service. The second bill talks about granting overseas Pakistanis the right to vote. 9 million Pakistanis live outside the country. The bill says they should have a say in the next election. And to get these bills passed, Imran Khan convened a meeting of his allies. It took place on Monday. It was attended by the Muttahida Qawmi Movement, MQM, the Pakistan Muslim League, PMLQ, the Grand Democratic Alliance, and the Balochistan Awami Party. These are four of the PTI's strongest allies. So Imran Khan tried getting them on board to make them vote in favor of his proposed bills, and that plan seems to have worked. Both the bills on using EVMs in the next election and granting overseas Pakistanis the right to vote have been passed by the Pakistani parliament today, but not without a protest. The opposition staged a walkout. They accused the government of bulldozing the bills, of not counting all of the opposition's votes. They labelled EVMs as evil and vicious machines. Some even accused the speaker of not respecting his chair and siding with the government. You have to watch this.
EVM क्या चीज है जनाब स्पीकर? Evil and vicious machine. जिस गैर कानूनी तरीके से और गैर आईनी तरीके से आज इन बिलों को पेश किया जा रहा है, वो कहां गई आपकी मुशावरत? कहां गया आपका खत? कहां गया हमारे खत का जवाब? आज भी मैंने आपको एक रिमाइंडर दिया है। अगर आपने ये इतनी बड़ी बात की है तो फिर उसका एसिड टेस्ट है जनाब स्पीकर कि आप दारुल अवाम के स्पीकर की तरह पार्टी मेंबरशिप से इस्तीफा दे दें तो हम आपको लब्बैक कहेंगे।
हम सवाल करते हैं हुकूमत से, निजाम से कि आप कब तक बंदूक की नोक पे, बूट के जोर पे कानून साजी करने की कोशिश करेंगे? और जब आप कोशिश करते हो, जॉइंट सेशन में कोशिश करते हो, पूरा जोर, जबर और हुकूमत की ताकत के बावजूद आप अपना 222 नंबर्स पूरा नहीं कर सके। आप इन सारे हथकंडों के बावजूद हमारे नजर में आज भी नाकाम रहे और इंशाअल्लाह ताला आगे जाके भी नाकाम रहे।
At the end of it all, the first day of the Parliament session may have gone as a sigh of relief for Imran Khan. For weeks, there were indications that he was on his way out, that things were no longer in his control. But by managing to get some of these bills passed, he has shown that he may be down, but not really out yet. It's an interesting political match going on in Pakistan. Let's talk about another Indian neighbor, the Maldives. There is a buzz in the power corridors. The question doing the rounds is whether all's not well between the Maldives and India. Now, these two countries are very close, be in terms of the geographical location or the people-to-people contact. For the Maldives, India is its closest ally, also the most dependable partner. The Maldives swears by its policy of India first. For New Delhi too, Malé is just as important. When the 2004 tsunami struck, India was the first to assist the Maldives. When the 2014 water crisis struck, India was again the first to extend a helping hand. Air Force planes and Navy vessels were loaded with bottled water and sent to Malé. In 2020, India dispatched 30,000 doses of measles vaccines. The Maldives was also among the first two nations to receive Wuhan virus vaccines under Vaccine Maitri of India. Ties between India and the Maldives have been rock solid, but something happened last year, something that forced the government of the Maldives to put out a reminder. This is what it says. Let me read it out for you. The strong bilateral relationship between the Maldives and India is based on shared historical and cultural ties matched by dynamic people-to-people contact. India has always been the Maldives' closest ally and trusted neighbour, extending constant and consistent support to the people of the Maldives on all fronts. What was the need for this statement? Well, in the middle of the pandemic, an anti-India campaign spread through the island nation. The campaign was called India Out. The slogan was first heard on the streets. Then it became a hashtag, then a trend, and then a threat. A few months ago, a local man told his Twitter followers that he wanted RDX because he wanted to blow up the Indian High Commission in the Maldives. A lot had already happened by then. A section of the local media had put out anti-India articles. Indian diplomats were attacked online. India's High Commissioner to the Maldives had already penned down a letter to the Foreign Ministry expressing concern. The Maldives' Foreign Ministry had also put out a statement condemning the attacks. Also, security was increased outside the Indian mission. What was happening? The India Out campaign had gained momentum. But who exactly wanted India out, and who from India did they want out? There are many Indians in the Maldives. They make the second largest expatriate community. 25% of the Maldives' doctors are Indians. 25% of their teachers are Indians. So whom exactly did the campaigners want out? Apparently India's military presence. That's what they're against. But does India have a military presence in the Maldives? The fact is, it doesn't. What the Maldives does have, though, are choppers gifted by India. These, the Dhruv Advanced Light Choppers. India gave them to the Maldives in 2010 and 2015. These choppers are multi-purpose. They're used for search and rescue operations, weather surveillance, also for airlifting patients. But to some in the Maldives, these choppers represent India's military presence. Why is that? Because when India and the Maldives consolidated defence ties, the agreement provided for Indian troops to train the Maldives National Defence Force, MNDF. So in the last 10 years, India has trained more than 1,300 MNDF trainees. It just so happens that MNDF commands these choppers that India has sent. So that's the link between Indian choppers and military presence. Now there's training and there's military presence, and these two are very different things. And I'm not denying that the Maldives has immense strategic significance for India. It does. After all, the island country is just 300 nautical miles from India's west coast. What I'm saying is that India has always respected Malay's sovereignty, and I'll give you an example. In 1988, there was an attempted coup in the Maldives. A group led by businessman Abdullah Lutfi attempted to seize power. He had the backing of a Sri Lankan secessionist group called the PLOTE, the People's Liberation Organization of Tamil Eelam. 60 mercenaries from this group landed in Malé in 1988. They took control of the city. Maumoon Abdul Gayoom was the president of the Maldives then. He managed to escape and he requested India for help. New Delhi launched Operation Cactus within hours of the SOS call. Indian paratroopers rescued the president, returned control of Malé to the government and came back home. India withdrew its troops the moment they were no longer required. Do you know why? To ward off any fears of military presence or territorial aspirations. So any idea of an Indian military presence in the Maldives is flawed. It's a misunderstanding. It's a perception that grew in 2013. That's when Abdullah Yamin Abdul Gayoom became the president of the Maldives. Under him, the country became pro-China. Ties with India deteriorated and anti-India sentiment grew. So much so that at one point, the Yamin government asked India to take back the choppers. This was in 2016. India refused. 2 years later, there was a change of guard in the Maldives. Ibrahim Soli took oath as president. And he repaired ties with India. Very recently, the two countries signed the UTF Harbour Project Agreement. Under this agreement, India is providing grant assistance to the Maldives. The perception of military presence made a comeback with this. This time, it was in the form of the India Out campaign. Soon, local media began speculating that India could turn the UTF project into a naval base, an Indian naval base. The Maldives refuted this as early as 2019, but who can stop a rumor from spreading, especially when it suits some political interests and foreign players? What makes for a better election pitch than a weakened government and threatened sovereignty? And who gets to benefit from an anti-India campaign in the Maldives more than China? The India Out campaign does not hint at deteriorating bilateral ties. What it hints at is a domestic political tussle, one that's being fanned by fringe groups with the possible blessings of a certain neighbor of India. We've often talked about profit from pandemic. Here's another example. Pfizer, BioNTech and Moderna, 3 vaccine makers, they delivered 2 shots for the Wuhan virus. Do you know how much profit they made from these shots? $1,000 every second. You heard that right, $1,000 every second. Pfizer, BioNTech and Moderna made $1,000 every second from Wuhan virus vaccines. When these shots came out, they were sold like lifelines. These vaccines were supposed to pull the world out from the pandemic. Instead, they ended up building monopolies. While these 3 companies, Pfizer, BioNTech and Moderna, are making money hand over fist. Look at the numbers. The vaccine trio have earned billions already. This year, they have made $34 billion from their shots, $34 billion. This is profit before taxes, which means these companies earn more than $93 million every day. $65,000 a minute, $1,000 every second. The profit margins on these shots are unbelievable. Let's take a look at Pfizer first. It made its vaccine in collaboration with BioNTech. Both companies split the profits 50-50. They will make $36 billion in revenue from the Wuhan virus vaccine this year. Reports say their profit margin is 77%. I'm going to repeat that. A profit margin of 77%. Moderna is not far behind. It will make more than $11 billion in revenue. What's the profit margin? A whopping 70%. How did they earn these obscene profits? By prioritizing lucrative contracts, by selling their vaccines to the rich first. Pfizer and Moderna have sold their vaccines primarily to high-income countries. Take the case of Pfizer. So far, it has delivered more than 2 billion shots. Pfizer, more than 1 billion of them went to high-income countries. Middle and lower-income countries got around 658 million doses. Do you see the gap here? Middle and lower-income countries did not even get half of Pfizer's supply. What about Moderna? The company has sold almost exclusively to rich countries. So far, Moderna has sold 568 million shots. Who were the buyers? Canada. It got 26 million Moderna jabs. Germany, 13 million shots. Switzerland, 7.5. Spain, 15. France, almost 27 million. Italy, almost 15 million. South Korea, more than 15 million. The United States, look at the lion's share. It got 281 million shots of the Moderna vaccine. 96% of Moderna shots have gone to upper middle and high-income countries. Rich countries allowed these companies to build monopolies. They set the price. They decide who will get the shots first and when the deliveries are going to be made. The developed world has locked up vaccine supplies till 2023, and this has been done through advanced contracts. The rest of the world is suffering because of this. As of this month, only 6% of Africa is fully vaccinated. Vaccine monopolies are making sure that the pandemic stays longer than it must. The companies that make life-saving shots are also making the virus win with their greed. Now, what's the deal with the House of Saud and fakes? When Donald Trump was the US president, the Saudi royal family gifted him 2 fur coats. This was in 2017. The fur turned out to be fake. The same year, a Saudi prince bought a painting. It was by Leonardo da Vinci. The painting was called Salvator Mundi, nicknamed the male Mona Lisa. The painting had a striking image of Jesus. It had vanished for several centuries. It repeatedly changed hands. When it was put on auction in New York's Christie's, a Saudi prince was quick to bag the masterpiece. He paid $450 million for this. The painting became the world's most expensive. But the little-known prince was never an art collector. Why did he splurge on this piece? The purchase, some believe, was on behalf of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Well, whoever be the real owner, we have some bad news for him. Salvator Mundi has been downgraded. It may be a fake. In other words, Leonardo da Vinci may have never made this painting. He may have authorized it, possibly supervised it, or the painting could have just been attributed to him. But did da Vinci paint it? At the most, perhaps a few strokes. That's all da Vinci contributed to the Salvator Mundi. The art newspaper says the painting was most probably the work of one of da Vinci's assistants or students. The revelation has hit the value of this painting. Whoever paid the $450 million will no longer get the returns he had hoped for. The Salvator Mundi currently features at the Prado National Museum in Madrid. The painting is being clubbed with works supervised or authored by Leonardo. Now, there is a category featuring works by Leonardo da Vinci. But this one is not a part of the list anymore. Here's what the museum has to say. And I'm going to quote from the statement that has been made. There were moments when Leonardo found it difficult to paint due to his perfectionism and his numerous other occupations, and his pupils undertook the task for him. You know, art never made a lot of sense to me. I understand art is value, but this fake versus real dilemma is what makes it very baffling. Why is it that a painting, which is just as beautiful, loses its value the moment it's revealed that someone else had the paintbrush? Have you ever thought about it? Art is an investment, and like every other investment, art has its own set of rules. Its value varies depending on the artist. Art connoisseurs keep a whole lot of things before picking up a piece. For starters, who is the artist? Is he or she recognized? A famous one or an emerging one? Can you place your bets and bucks on him or her? Then comes the genre of painting, its category. Is it abstract or nature or still life? There's also a long list of do's and don'ts. For example, digging up the origin of the painting. It is a must. Checking its authenticity, another must. But not getting your art insured is a big no-no. You see, fine money is fine art. The global art market is valued at $50 billion. Whoever is the real owner of the Salvator Mundi paid more than the Saudi Crown Prince had paid for a football club, the Newcastle United. Whoever is the real owner of this painting won't be the first to lose money in art. There was once a Dutch artist named Han van Meegeren. During the 1940s, he would sell paintings created by artist Jan Vermeer. Turns out the pieces were fake. The Dutch artist would make the paintings himself, then put them in a pizza oven to give them an antique and authentic look. He made $30 million with those knockoffs. Have you seen this painting? This is the most popular image of William Shakespeare today. This painting is known as the Flower Portrait. It's believed to have been made in 1609, which is when Shakespeare was alive. In 2015, an X-ray revealed that the painting was made in the 1800s, long after Shakespeare was dead. Art is big business, and there are many waiting to make a couple of quick bucks in this business. Even the most popular auction houses are failing to spot fakes. The Salvator Mundi was verified by experts around the world, but such is the mastery of fake art, no one could tell. Now, in case you ever plan to invest in art, don't ignore the due diligence. Ask for the authenticity certificate, check with an expert, get the painting appraised, and do your own research. After all of this, if you're lucky enough, you may just land an authentic masterpiece. Best of luck with that. And our last story tonight is from Britain, where the government is currently embroiled in a sleaze row. It faces accusations of corruption. The accusations primarily concern a former MP who was found guilty of lobbying for 2 companies in return for money. The British government first tried to defend him, then took a U-turn by admitting its mistake. Today, the Prime Minister was grilled in the Parliament over this scandal. Boris Johnson was supposed to answer questions from the opposition, but his efforts to dodge those questions landed him in a rather awkward situation. He had to be reminded by the Speaker of the House that he is not above scrutiny. Here's a report on what happened.
Prime Minister, sit down. Prime Minister, I'm not going to be challenged. You may be the Prime Minister of this country, but in this House, I'm in charge, and we're going to carry on.
It was an unusual sight. The Prime Minister of Britain got a severe dressing down in the British Parliament.
That is what he's guilty of.
Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons, was unsparing in his rebuke. He reminded Boris Johnson that his authority is not supreme, that he has no choice but to obey the rules of the Parliament. What was all this about? The so-called sleazy row, which has hit 10 Downing Street for the uninitiated. The British government has been accused of sleaze, immoral and corrupt behavior in its functioning. It all started with a lobbying scandal, which involved Conservative MP Owen Paterson. He was accused of trying to influence the government's policies in favor of 2 companies for which he does paid work. The companies in question are Randox, a clinical diagnostics firm, and Lynn's Country Foods, a meat distributor. Mr. Paterson apparently used his parliamentary office to approach UK's Food Standards Agency on behalf of these companies. In other words, he lobbied to uphold the interests of these companies in return for money. Something that is strictly forbidden. The British Parliamentary Standards Commissioner found him guilty. It decided to suspend him. The Boris Johnson government challenged the suspension. It called for a review into the standards of commissioner. And then it took a humiliating U-turn by ditching all such efforts and admitting it was at fault. The MP in question has resigned. The Prime Minister has been left to deal with the opposition's ire.
I won't comment on the missing.
On Wednesday, he was subjected to a fierce parliamentary grilling over the scandal. Leading the charge was Keir Starmer, the newly appointed chief of UK's Labour Party.
We still haven't shut the door on the revolving door where ministers are regulating a company 1 minute and working for them the next. There are plenty of cases that still stain this House. There are 2 simple steps to sorting it out: proper independence and powers for the Business Appointments Committee and banning these job swaps. Will the Prime Minister take those steps?
The Prime Minister was on the defensive throughout. Instead of answering questions on his MP's conduct, he repeatedly tried to question the opposition leader over his past actions, which he said amounted to sleaze as well.
Mr. Speaker, I've called, as you know, and indeed you have called, Mr. Speaker, for a cross-party approach to this. And what I think we need, to do is to work together on the basis of the independent report by the Committee of Standards in Public Life to take things forward and indeed to address the appeals process. But what I think everybody can see, Mr. Speaker, is that in a classic lawyerly way, the right honourable gentleman is now trying to prosecute others for exactly the course of action that he took himself. What I think the nation wants to know, because his register is incomplete, who paid Mishcon Derea and who paid the 25,000? Who's paying him for his...
The exchange turned so bitter that the Speaker of the House had to intervene and remind Boris Johnson that he was the one who was supposed to answer the questions, not the opposition.
Prime Minister, I don't want to fall out about it. I've made it very clear. It is Prime Minister's questions. It's not for the opposition to answer your question. Whether we like it or not, those are the rules of the game that we're all into, and we play by the rules, don't we? And we respect this House, so let's respect the House.
This dramatic intervention is dominating headlines. It shows that Boris Johnson won't have an easy exit from the sleaze row mess. A member of his party has been accused of corruption. The Prime Minister faces charges of trying to cover it up. Some tough days lie ahead for 10 Downing Street. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
That is a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching.
Oh, it's rather sad that it's yours.
I know, 8 years is a chief of staff. It is a long time. In fact, the only person